Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we share all kinds of tips, advice, and interview guests on all things innovation and leadership in modern marketing. Each episode is a conversation with inspiring people who make wonderful contributions to our knowledge in these areas and spark curiosity and ideas to pursue. Join me, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
You can't always just look at your target market in terms of a single persona. I think if you have a direct-to-consumer product, you can go after a narrower set of personalities in the population. But if you're B2B, and if you're selling into HR or sales or the C-suite, you're gonna have all different types of people in that role, and realizing that the thing that is really going to capture the attention of one CEO might be very different than something that captures the attention of the next CEO, because those people are different and their brain chemistry is different, so they're gonna respond to different types of potential rewards, potential value, both long term and short term.
Hi there, Innovator. It's really great to be back with another episode. I hope you've had an awesome week so far. I trust too that you enjoyed my recent conversations with Greg Rowlett of the Ambitious Media Group and with Mark Robinson of the International Wealth Academy. I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest today, Zach McGill, who is the founder and CEO of Perk Health. Perk Health is a corporate health and wellness platform that provides highly personalised experiences and habit-building coaching using technology combined with psychology and an understanding of human behaviour. Employers who use Perk Health can lower their healthcare costs, increase their productivity and decrease absenteeism. Perk Health delivers their products through a virtual system, and their app retains over 10 times the engagement of traditional wellness programs. Perk Health tailors the program to each individual, making it not only easy and habit-forming, but fun to participate. A quick promotional message from our sponsor, InnovaBuzz, where we help coaches and consultants build professional credibility, engage their target audience, and connect with their ideal clients. Now, to build that connection, you've got to be really clear about who your ideal clients are and how you help them. And to help you get clarity about who your ideal client is, take a look at our Marketing Master mini class. That will give you absolute clarity on your ideal client and how you can communicate with them to build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship. Access the Marketing Master mini class for free at innovabuzz.co/Marketing Master. In our discussion today, Zach talked to me about the trigger, action, reward cycle and the Big Five personality model. He explained the importance of fun and enjoyment in the journey of building new habits and changed behaviour, and also the importance of frequent and immediate rewards along the entire journey. Without further ado, then, let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from Zach McGill. Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from St. Paul, Minneapolis in the USA, Zach McGill, who's the founder and the CEO of Perk Health. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, Zach. It's a great privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Sunny Hahn, who was our guest on episode 232 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested that we have a chat with you, Zach. So a big hello to Sunny.
Yeah, thanks, Sunny, and appreciate the shout out.
Yeah. Now, one of your products at Perk Health, I know you've got a whole lot of things in the pipeline, but one of the products that's currently in the market is a healthy habit building app for teams that combines technology, psychology, and behavioral science to guide people through a highly personalized wellness program. And the result being that it is an automated product, but it helps people get and stay healthy in a way that's enjoyable and sustainable for them personally. So I'm really looking forward to digging into the origins of that and also into some of the spin-off products that you have coming down the pipeline. But before we start talking about all things wellness and health and technology, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get to where you are today, and what were some of the big moments in that journey?
Yeah, so for me, this traces back quite a long ways. My co-founder, whose name is Doug DeBold, we met in junior high track and field, and we became sort of fast friends through athletics, and it was sort of a big part of our childhood. And then fast forward to the end of college, I realized that I wanted to start a business. Originally, I was studying engineering, and I realized that I really wanted to sort of invent things. And for me, the best path to do that was going to be more sort of the business side than actually going into an engineering field. And so when I was looking at different ideas, it sort of struck me that phase of my life where I was able to participate in a team and have like these goals and sort of the community and everything that came around with that was becoming a lot more difficult. And at the same time, it was becoming harder and harder to sort of stay healthy. And so I looked at that and I said, wow, there's this whole period of my life where I was doing these things that were, really good for me, but I was doing them because I really enjoyed them. And what if we could sort of encapsulate that in a piece of technology? And so me and Doug sort of got to work on that, and it sort of started from that really simple idea. But I think what made all the difference for us is we really went deep on the psychology and the behavioral science behind why people really do what they do, and how is it that you form a new habit, and how is it that you stick with it, and what are the differences between people and between habits that really determine success over time. And that was the sort of the research and the train of thought that led us to building Perk Health and that first wellness product, and now more recently helping other companies in the healthcare space and outside of it leverage some of those same capabilities, so that when you build a product that's built to help people, you're not having to guess on whether or not people are going to use it or not, whether or not they're going to keep using it or not, and then whether or not that usage is going to lead to real behavior change. And so we kind of we dove in and we started building the company, and we've definitely had some bumps and bruises along the way, but here we are today now, 7 or 8 years on.
Yeah. Yeah. What's fascinating to me is that, the product you have is specific to the health and wellness area, the Perk Health app. However, the whole philosophy around understanding what motivates people and building habits that lead to a successful outcome in any endeavor, I think is a great model to kind of look at in terms of how does all that work. But I guess before we dig into that a little bit, tell us specifically what is Perk Health and who is the target market? How does it work?
Yeah, so we're unfortunately a few things right now. But the simplest way is, the core Perk Health is an app is a wellness app. So our target market is corporations who want to help their employees become healthier. So that one's fairly simple. But more recently, like I briefly mentioned, we're starting to offer sort of those capabilities sort of as a service to other companies that want to incorporate those capabilities into their own product or service. So those are things like education and cardiac rehab, and we've done some work in employee productivity. And the most recent one is in the healthcare space around the use of opioids and helping patients reduce the number of prescription opioids that they use.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and in all of those cases, what's the core principle in terms of using the technology to set in train habits that lead to the successful outcome?
Yeah, so we look at a couple main models that are all heavily evidenced in psychology broadly and behavioral science specifically. And the first one that we look at really closely is this trigger action reward cycle, just sort of one of the core ideas in behavioral science. And it's a pretty simple lens to look at things through. And it's basically when you want someone to do something, or they want to do something and you want to help them do it, you break it down into sort of three main components. The first is the trigger or the cue. You can basically think of this as some sort of a reminder, whether it's your phone buzzing or a note that you write yourself, or even sort of an internal feeling. And the next is the action, and that part's fairly simple. Is what is the action that we're trying to really motivate around, and this could be anything from going out and going for a run to opening your app and using it to sending an email or giving a coworker recognition. Could be kind of anything that you're pointing at. But then the third piece of that equation, and in a lot of ways the most important one, is the reward, because that's the kind of the core building block of human behavior is really around reward seeking. And you have to think about a reward in sort of an abstract way, in that there's rewards in terms of an attaboy or points or something like that, and kind of the way that we generally think about rewards. There's a lot of other types of internal rewards, the sense of belonging, or a sense of safety, or a sense of just kind of a sense of accomplishment, or a sort of internal sense of feeling like you've mastered something, or you've gotten a little bit better at something. Those are all different types of rewards. And so, we make sure that anything that, we're trying to help somebody with comes with one of those rewards, and does it in sort of the most immediate and concrete way possible. But then the next model that we look at really closely, because that kind of gives you an idea of something that's universal to all people, it's also really important to look at the individual differences between people. So we really look at personality traits, and specifically we like the Big Five personality model, because it's been well studied, and it's been shown to be valid for an individual over time, but also across ages and cultures. And what that does is gives us a lens to look at, for an individual, what are the types of triggers or cues that person is likely to respond to? What are the actions that for them are most likely to have sort of a built-in reward mechanism? Because it turns out that when it comes to something like exercise, just as an example, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. And I think we all have experience with the fact that some ways of going about it, you're just not going to like. There's not going to be, for some people, getting on a treadmill and running is just never something that's going to be inherently rewarding for them. But for some people it is. And for other people, going for a walk outside and maybe, with their dog is something that has a reward attached to it. And so we can sort of suss out some of those differences just based on a person's personality traits. But then on that last piece, when you're, sometimes adding an sort of extra reward on top of something, we can also, based on somebody's personality, figure out the most effective ways of doing that. So that could be as simple as, for this person, they're really going to respond to social type rewards. If they get some recognition from a friend, that's something that's really going to resonate with them. Or another person, maybe it's more, competitive, feeling like they're winning is going to be, still a social reward, but a different type of social reward that is going to work really well for that person. And there's some other models that we look at, but those are, we found to be a really good way of looking kind of across the population and then at individuals specifically, to make sure we're sort of covering everyone.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I like how you personalize it based on personality types and what motivates the different personality types. And I guess what I'm familiar with are things like Strava or the Fitbit apps where people can set small goals on the way to their basically what is ultimately a fitness or wellness goal, but the small goals might be around doing a certain number of steps a day or doing a certain number of, in my case, I'm a cyclist, so we have set ourselves targets of doing a certain number of kilometers a week and then a month and then a year. But yeah, then there's the competitive bit where my wife keeps telling me I've done more steps than my sister today, and so that there's those other motivational things that come into it. So is that how the Perk Health works as well?
Yeah, we use a lot of exactly those mechanisms. I would say what's interesting is with a lot of the products that you see that are out there, they have a different mixture of sort of motivating elements, and some of the ones like you just described are really good examples. But then what happens is, that's what sort of accounts for certain products being motivating for certain people and not working for other people.
Yeah,
And one of the
that's right.
things
They're not
that was
personalized. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. And so in some ways, I think, we were lucky in that with our first product being something that was for corporations, we needed to figure out a way to not just hone in on, a target population, a certain sort of type of person, a subset of the whole population that we could motivate. We really needed to figure out how we could motivate everybody within, a company's employees. And within a given company, you're going to have all sorts of different people. Because one of the things that we saw, from our competitors was typically they'd get, 10, maybe 15% of the company to participate. And we knew that if we were really going to improve the health of an entire population, we needed to motivate a much larger group of people. And so this approach where we looked across the population, when we added that sort of personalization layer to make sure that everybody has some things that will motivate them, it really made a difference in those engagement rates. So we typically see 75% or more of a population engage. And then the other thing that's really important is by focusing on habits and small rewards. And the thing that I didn't quite get to in that trigger action reward cycle that I was describing is that through rapid repetition of that, you actually start deepening this association in the person's brain between the action and the reward, to the point where over time that becomes basically an automated habit. And so the repetition really creates this habit, which is sort of there's a difference obviously between the single action and the habit. And so by doing that, we also saw much higher sort of long-term engagement rates. And that's another thing that, when you look at like a Strava, it has this like really incredible set of motivating factors. And for the right person, that's going to create this positive feedback loop, and they're going to, use it, and they're going to use it more and more, and they'll stick with it. But for a person who, those features that they built in are not as good of a match for, they might use it a few times, but it won't turn into a sticky habit like it might have, for you.
Yeah, yeah. So coming back to the idea of those motivators, what are some of the different ones that perhaps stand out for you that are different to those apps that are out there in the marketplace that are kind of not personalized but very popular?
Yeah, I think so. One really great example of a tricky one is one of the personality dimensions is called conscientiousness. And it really measures how sort of planful a person is, along with sort of a few other things. But somebody, for instance, who's really high on the conscientiousness dimension is the type of person who really likes making lists. They really like checking things off lists. They really like having, sort of this structure and these things to look forward to. And so for that type of person, a lot of the, kind of gamification things that you see out there do work pretty well. Or say, hey, if you hit this benchmark, you'll get this many points, and if you hit this goal, you'll sort of level up or whatever it might be. And there's kind of a very clear path by, continuing to do whatever, that app is sort of trying to motivate people around. And just sort of checking those things off if they bought in becomes very motivating. Now you've got then somebody on the opposite end of the spectrum. And if you give them, this sort of very clear, steps and points and levels and things like that, it becomes very, very boring for them very quickly. Mm-hmm. And they don't get any sort of intrinsic reward out of this feeling of sort of checking things off on this list. And so for that person, you need a lot more variety. You need a lot more sort of spontaneity. And there's a whole sort of different set of things that you need to engage and motivate that person. And we see this in our everyday lives, of course, too, right? You see the person who, is in the meeting and they really want to, figure out sort of what exactly is the agenda of this meeting. And, they want to punch through it, and then you're going to walk away with a to-do list. In a lot of ways, people who are high on conscientiousness are very, very productive because of that. But, those people who are lower on it, they, often feel like they're struggling. They'll say, they'll sort of follow that model because those people who are high on conscientiousness are really good at, building and sticking with habits. And say, okay, I'm gonna eat this exact same salad for lunch every day, or I'm gonna do my email at the exact same time every morning. But it inevitably fails because that person just doesn't get any reward out of that that amount of structure and that amount of sort of repetition. And so, and that's really sort of more how I am. So when I find myself, falling off of a habit that I wanted to do, I realize that, it's not because I'm not motivated enough. It's because it's becoming, sort of stale. I need to find a way to switch it up.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fascinating. It reminds me a little bit of, like Tony Robbins talks about, the 6 core human needs, and there's differing needs there. And I think what he says, or what I've heard said, is that if you can fulfill 3 of the 6 core needs, it becomes like an addiction. So then that's when the habit's ingrained.
Well, that is a really important piece of this that we talk a lot about is these methods, these things that we do to help people with healthy habits and, in their healthcare and things like that. They used to be really unknown. And we'd sort of go in and we'd explain, what our secret sauce was, and people would look at us like we were speaking a different language. But now they're much more known, but unfortunately, for negative reasons. These are a lot of the same methods that, Facebook, Instagram, and other, sort of really sticky apps are using to really draw people into their apps. And, the word they use, addiction, is, one that is becoming, used a lot in sort of the technology world. And so the ethics of how you use these methods, I think, is really, really important. And so for us, we always make sure that, people are opting in to what we're doing, and that we're helping them with goals that they've chosen for themselves, not that we have for them. It's not we have a goal that you're going to use our service so that you click more ads. But I think, that alignment and that transparency is really important, because ultimately, if you are using these things, you can build something that's addictive. And I think knowing that you have a responsibility to use it ethically.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And also, focusing on helping your clients achieving their goal and having the tool that enables them to build habits that will help them achieve that goal. You mentioned earlier education as one of the areas where you've done a little bit of work. I mean, I see a potential application here for there's lots of online courses that people put out there, and typically people buy those online courses and they start them, and most of them don't get finished, so they don't actually complete the course, and therefore presumably they don't get to the goal that they'd set out when they started that course or when they purchased that course. So talk to me a little bit about how you see this sort of technology working in that situation, and how people might be able to build in some of that psychology to help their students complete their courses.
That's a really great question, and something that we've actually thought quite a bit about. The leading contender when we started our first product was something that would have been the sort of leading contending idea was something that would have been a competitor to like a Coursera or one of those types of companies. So we've thought quite a bit about how can this be applied in that realm, because I think it's really important, and I think that there's a lot of really old ideas around how motivation and achievement works in the education realm, unfortunately. And the biggest thing that I see is this myth that the diploma is motivating. We have this outdated idea still in our minds around motivation that the way that it works is basically you have this big end goal, you're trying to get to this end state, and you do a bunch of stuff to get there so that you can feel the way that you think that you'll feel when you get there. Or these can open up certain doors or whatever, this kind of, end source of motivation is going to give you. And the reality is that behavior doesn't work that way, like we were talking about. Behavior works driven by reward, yes, but it really is driven by you could almost reframe reward as instant gratification. As humans, we really are driven by feeling good, feelings of reward that are sort of immediately attached to the action that's going to drive them. And so this disconnect of I'm going to do all of this hard work, this studying and all these things are not going to be fun, and basically I'm going to rely on willpower to get myself there, has been shown kind of over and over again to be a sort of flawed idea. And so the first thing that I would do when redesigning how education might work is really building in a concept of frequent and immediate reward. How can you make each lesson, each experience be intrinsically rewarding, so that it doesn't feel like you're sort of postponing the payoff. So that's absolutely number one. I think number two then is when you come back to personalization, we know that we all learn differently, but we also I don't think we think enough about the sort of the experience of learning and how we enjoy different experiences of learning. In that, there's different ways, of course, to consume information, and we're all have different abilities when it comes to reading and testing and things like that. But for some people, a more experiential approach might just be a lot more fun. And if that's more fun, they're going to be much more likely to stick with it. And for some people, an experience that's more social is going to be really important. And these aren't necessarily groundbreaking ideas, but I think that the number one thing I would do is really look at for each individual, how do we make it just the process a little bit more fun? Forget a little bit about the goal and think a little bit more about the process.
Yeah, that's really great advice, and I think fun is one key word there, because if it's something that people enjoy, that in itself is an intrinsic motivator, I think, for pretty much everybody. But what one person finds fun somebody else may not. So that's where the personalization part comes in.
Yep.
All right. Now, you also mentioned the app that you've been working on with healthcare providers to help people manage their pain, and ultimately the goal would be there to be less reliant on opiates. So talk to us a little bit about that one, because that's really fascinating and very topical right now because of all the discussion in the media about opiates and people overly reliant on opiates in certain situations, and also whether the producers, the pharmaceutical companies, have been honest with us about the other effects of the opiates.
Yeah, this is the one we're really excited about, because, like you mentioned, it's very topical, because it's such a huge issue right now, and for us, we're excited to be able to work on it because we've worked on a number of other things in health, and we've shown that our approach has been able to achieve really strong results, and this space is something where obviously we need some new ideas and some new approaches. And I can't say by any means that we're approaching this by ourselves. The collaborators on this research are some of the smartest people that I've ever worked with. But from our side, what we're looking at here is how can we boost the effectiveness of one, the sort of already known or best in class tapering methods and interventions that are out there, by adding sort of our expertise in usage, sort of participation, and helping people in the sort of stickiness. Because just like with wellness apps, with healthcare apps, you see very low participation, and that's one of the biggest barriers to a piece of healthcare technology being effective. But the other part that I'm really excited about is also helping people stick with the alternative pain methodologies that they and their provider decide will be a good fit for them. Because it's one thing to say, okay, I'm gonna try something that's not a pill, but the reality is, that in a lot of ways the other things are a lot more difficult. And one of the other models that we sort of look at when we're evaluating whether an action is a good candidate for this sort of behavioral cycle that we focus on is we look at the sort of reward or sort of motivation attached to that against how sort of difficult it is. Because the reality is that even if something is really rewarding, but it's really difficult, it's not something that somebody's going to do. And so our job is going to be to figure out all the ways that we can lower the barriers to those alternative pain management strategies while increasing the motivational factors. And I think we're going to be able to do some really neat things where we're going to be able to get, a person's caregivers and loved ones involved in ways that create a positive reward mechanism around, using opioids, in accordance with the plan that they created with their healthcare provider.
Yeah, well, that brings up a really good point there in terms of accountability, and certainly whether it's in reducing your use of opioids when you're experiencing pain for whatever reason, or whether it's in a variety of other applications. I mean, even in the exercise area, having somebody else that holds you accountable is hugely motivating and hugely, well, I know, I mean, I go out for my morning bike ride and some days I don't feel like going, but I know somebody else is going to be there and I've arranged with them to be there. So I kind of feel as though it's my duty to go out and not leave them on their own. So is that an important part of the whole motivation as well?
Absolutely. But through sort of the way that we look at the world, I would reframe it a little bit in that, the accountability side is of course important, but from what we've seen, at least, the actually more important part of the encounter, like that you just described, is the positive feeling that you get when you show up and they're happy that you're there.
Yeah, yeah,
It's because the avoiding pain is definitely something that will motivate people. So you kind of want to avoid the pain of feeling like you let this person down, but that ends up being more fleeting than the much more lasting effect of the positive feeling you get when you show up and you're with your buddy and you have a good bike ride together, and hopefully you have some good conversation, or maybe you have a little bit of competition or whatever it is about that relationship that sort of keeps it fun and interesting. But we really like to sort of turn up the positive side as much as possible, and we prioritize that over sort of really looking at those negative
yeah,
reinforcers.
yeah. I guess it comes back a little bit to that personalization, though, because there's people that are more motivated by a towards goal, or as you've described it, a positive feeling. There's people that are kind of motivated a little bit by an away from goal, and certainly in the area of pain, I mean, where they're starting from is an away from situation, right? I've got pain because I've undergone surgery or whatever it might be, and I'm now taking these opiates to control that pain, which is very much an away from situation. So how do you make that transformation?
Yeah, and it is always interesting to kind of look at the interplay between those things. There's a parallel could be something like looking at smoking cessation, where you're not trying to necessarily build a habit, you're trying to quit a habit.
Mm,
And so there you say, how do you kind of build rewards around that, which is definitely difficult, right? And it comes down to, in a lot of cases, um, building rewards around alternatives. And so is kind of what we're looking at again with pain is, when it comes to pain management, how do we build rewards around alternative strategies to manage that pain? Um, Obviously the hope is that we can also use this as a prompt to create some healing, and not just sort of management of the pain. But we still sort of try to look on that positive side. But you're absolutely right. It's something that is different between people. There is a personality dimension that we look at that looks at sort of people's sensitivity to future possible negative events. And for people who are really high on it, it's a tough thing. I mean, it's a personality trait that definitely intersects with things like anxiety.
mm,
And so for people who are higher on that dimension, you see them, really sort of anticipating negative things happening. And so that can
yeah,
be a really big barrier to starting new habits or trying different things, because they'll sort of worry that those are going to, end poorly. And so for that person, we found it's even more important to break things down into the most sort of bite-sized size possible, and still focus on the positive of what happens when you complete those really small chunks. But actually, you're absolutely right that the funny thing happens on the other side of that spectrum is you have people who just won't anticipate anything bad happening ever.
yeah,
So when it comes to health, this person will be like, hey, I don't need to go work out. I don't need to eat healthy. Like, I'm going to be just fine. Or, I don't need to, work hard at my job, or, make any other changes, because, everything's going to be fine. And so it's actually for that person that every once in a while you do need to kind of say, hey, if you don't pay attention a little bit, things could go, not as well as
mm,
you think that they might. So there is still a space for a little bit of negative reinforcement every now and then, but you just have to be really careful about who you deal with.
Yeah, that's right. And it also comes back to what you said earlier about the instant gratification versus a long-term goal. So being healthy into old age is a very long-term goal. And if somebody, as a young person, is quite healthy without doing a lot of exercise, or, for example, weight-bearing exercise, and in old age they are at risk then of getting osteoarthritis or osteoporosis, that's way off in the distance, and there's no
Yep.
real immediate motivation for doing something, is there?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's the biggest crux I see with motivation around anything health related is, yeah, people are looking at, these really long term outcomes, like you're saying, whether it's health in old age, or, of course, the classic one saying, I want to lose a lot of weight because I want to change the way that I look. And again, it's a really it's a sort of recipe for motivation that just doesn't work in the end, because as humans, we can, but we're very not good at leveraging those, sort of longer term rewards to motivate us in, the action that is right in front of us. So you might, really feel that want, but it's not necessarily going to turn into, putting your shoes on and heading out the door. And that's why it's so important to, like you were saying, focus on that instant gratification.
Yeah. Now, this is a fascinating conversation, and I think there's applications for this principle right across the board. And if you look at topic close to my heart and something we talk about a lot here is in marketing. One of the things that really is the secret to good marketing is understanding what motivates people and marrying up the ideal client and the service that you have with the right people, but also with how can you motivate them to make use of that product or service in a way that they will then achieve results. So how do you see that working in a marketing context?
Also a great question. So I think that in the marketing world, there's a lot of literature that really sort of, to your point, makes you think about what is the value that you're providing, which is another way of sort of saying what's the reward that you're going to create for your customer, right? But and again, I think there's a lot of discussion around, are you going to frame that as a business value, something that's sort of tangible and is going to hit their bottom line, or are you going to frame it around an emotional reward that person is going to get? Are you going to have a more of an emotional appeal? In a lot of cases, obviously, you want both. But I think that some of these same models are actually, like you're saying, pretty interesting to overlay onto that problem. So saying, okay, there might be a long-term value that I know this customer really wants out of this, or whether it be, in terms of, profit or something more emotional. But is that going to turn into a purchasing behavior? And this is definitely something that we've seen in our sales and marketing, that, if you can't provide or promise a more immediate reward, sometimes great intention doesn't turn into a sale. So really thinking about, how do you, of course, you have to provide long-term value, but how do you also make sure that, as soon as somebody signs on, and writes you a check, or buys your product, or hires you, how are you going to make sure that, on day one, that they're going to feel good about that? And then two, when looking at those different appeals, realizing that you can't always just look at your target market in terms of a single persona. I think if you have a direct-to-consumer product, you can go after a narrower set of personalities in the population. But if you're B2B, and if you're selling into HR, or sales, or the C-suite, you're going to have all different types of people in that role. And realizing that the thing that is really going to capture the attention of one CEO might be very different than something that captures the attention of the next CEO, because those people are different, and their brain chemistry is different, so they're gonna respond to different types of potential rewards, potential value, both long term and short term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really great point, and I think that there's lots of things to think about there in terms of marketing and sales. And I love your point about that you've got to have some immediate rewards, and I'm very strong on the whole customer journey from the point at which they first get to know about you and that you might be somebody who has a solution to a problem that they have, right through to where they've achieved the results that they set out to achieve, and they're actually becoming an ambassador for your business. But along that journey, so there's a point at which they make a decision to buy your product or service, but there's other points in that journey where you've got to provide that reward or that value on an ongoing basis. So I think that's a really good point. All right, Zach, well, this has been really great. Now, where can people find out more about Perk Health, and perhaps even reach out and say thank you for what you've shared with us today?
Yeah, the best place to find us is on perkhealth.me, or we have a new site up that has some of our more recent work at perkmotivation.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Great. I think it's what I've skipped over a bit is our buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field with some tips from your experience. So this comes back to innovation and business, and you've got quite a bit there to contribute, I'm sure. So I've got 5 questions, and hopefully your answers will inspire our audience to go and do something awesome today, and maybe even give them some motivation. So what do you think
Excellent.
is the number one thing anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
I'm not sure I can say what the number one thing is, but one thing that's helped me a lot is to travel. I think, in one way or another, to immerse yourself in something that is foreign to you, I think is really one of the best ways to step outside of your own context. Because one of the biggest barriers to innovation I've found is that in your daily life, it can be difficult, I think, to see the difference between something that is sort of I would say a natural law versus a man-made law. There's a lot of things about how our world works that we sort of take for granted as being immovable. And I think when you immerse yourself in a different world, a different culture, or whatever it might be, you sort of realize that a lot of those things are just assumptions that have been created by other people. And you realize that there's a lot more latitude for creating completely new concepts than you might have previously realized.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love traveling into different countries and environments, and of course, you always find things that that pique my curiosity. I always find things that pique my curiosity, and I sort of look at something, why are they doing that? Which is totally foreign to the way I'm experiencing things at home. So, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
I would say for me, my process when I'm trying to create an idea or a product to solve a problem is I really try to get as far down to the core of it as possible. So when it came to this idea of helping people build healthier habits, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at it. You can see, what's trending and what people are doing, and what other coaches are successful or things like that. But for me, and I think where our success came from is I said this all stems from our brains, and so how can I learn as much as possible about where behavior and habits come from? And so we talk to the smartest people that we could find in that field, and read every book that we could get our hands on. And that taking sort of that bottom up approach, I think, is what allows you to have ideas that are non-obvious, I think, and hopefully different from something that might already exist.
Yeah, I love that. Sort of digging down into something to the point of saying, well, here's the problem, which is in the example of the Perk Health app is building healthy habits, but what's behind that, or how can that apply? And I think, based on our discussion today, that makes it a lot easier then to see how does that apply in other areas.
Right, because if we just looked at what was working well in healthy habits, we wouldn't have necessarily been able to transfer that learning to all these other fields.
All right. Now, do you have a favorite resource that you use most often?
A favorite resource that I use most often. I try to read a lot, and so I love Audible and audiobooks. I love listening to books on business and innovation and all other sorts of random topics to hopefully pique my curiosity while going for runs and things like that. But if you're thinking more of kind of like a tool that we use around innovation, I have come to love Notion. It's a project management software, and I keep everything in it. What I love about it is it used to be that all my ideas happened in a notes app, and then our sort of company's objectives and roadmaps would happen in Trello, and then our software development would happen in Jira. And now everything is in Notion, and I find the value of all those things being connected in one place is tremendous, because I can trace a feature that we're working on back to a strategy, back to an idea, or a concept, and I find that just really valuable to stay sane.
Yeah, well, I'm a huge fan of both Audible and of Notion. It's a great app. And like you, I listen to lots of audio books and podcasts as well, but Audible is great. Okay, now what's the best way to keep a project on track?
When you figure this one out, let me know. I think that what I try to do is, in an early stage of a project, get all the ideas possible on the table, and then once we settled on direction, to really try to manage scope. But I would say that I'm probably the biggest problem in our company as far as this goes, because I love new ideas and I can't stop thinking about different ways of approaching a problem that we might have already been working on for a long time. But I think we need to apply a little bit of our own magic to figure out how I feel a bit more reward by keeping things off track, because I feel a lot more reward in coming up with new ideas.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So maybe there's an app, habit building app there that could be developed. Okay. What's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
I think this would relate back to the first couple of questions you asked me there. I think it's about going deep, about going deep in a way that really helps you understand what underlies whatever you're working on. So not just like knowing the space and knowing the landscape, I think those things are important, but really understanding the things that are upstream of whatever you're working on. I think, like we talked about, not only does that help you sort of transfer the knowledge that you might have, but I think that if you're going to find a non-obvious and differentiated solution, it's not going to be by looking at what everybody else is doing. It's at figuring out why things work the way that they do.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think, you've demonstrated that really clearly how you've gone about putting that into practice with the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay, now, what kind of advice would you like to leave our listener with today as a bit of a parting inspiration for somebody that wants to be a leader in innovation and in their field?
I would say, to bring it back to, I guess, one of the core themes, it seems, of our chat today is, for the people you're trying to serve, or the problem you're trying to solve, figure out a way that there can be a little bit of reward in the thing that you're building. And I've seen this across the board in both the products that I enjoy using and the people that I get a lot of value out of, and the companies that we've helped. That when you can take your solution or your offering and you can take it from a point where it's delivering value to a point where it's delivering value and it imparts a bit of joy, and it does that on a regular basis, that's the point where you really got something. And that's the point where your thing just might become addicting in a good way.
Yeah, I love that. So basically building in the rewards and the fun and joy throughout the customer journey on the way to
Exactly.
solving the problem or the achieving the goal.
Right. And you put in a really good way there in terms of, throughout the journey.
Great. Well, finally then, who would you like me to chat with on a future InnovaBuzz podcast, and why?
Yeah, I would suggest Katrina Anderson. She is another Minneapolis-based startup founder of a company called Clinician Nexus, and they're doing very, very well, and they are moving very fast. Their team is extremely bright, and she's done a tremendous job, I think, of being innovative at the same time as creating a product that really is based around their ability to listen to their market and their customers, and I think that's really paying off for them.
All right, sounds fascinating. So we'll reach out to Katrina and maybe get an intro from you and have a chat with her on the InnovaBuzz podcast. So thanks for that suggestion. And thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us today. I've really enjoyed this conversation, learned a lot about Perk Health, but also about what drives your thinking behind developing that app and also the other apps that you're working on. So I wish you all the best for the future. I look forward to hearing more about the new products coming on board, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you. This has been a ton of fun, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share what we've learned and to be on your podcast. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to talking more in the future.
Thanks, Zach.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that insightful and enlightening conversation with Zach and took something away from his episode. I'm really impressed with Zach's model of combining the technology, the personality style assessment, and behavioural psychology to build new habits. And, as we talked about in today's conversation, I think there are many other applications for this approach, particularly in service of your target audience. I'd love to know what you took away from Zach's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which you can find at innovabiz.co/Zach McGill. That is ZACHMCGILL. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/Zach McGill. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with Zach there, as well as links to the Perk Health and the Perk Motivation websites, his social media pages, and the other resources we spoke about in today's conversation. Zach suggested we have a conversation with Katrina Anderson of Clinician Nexus on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So Katrina, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast, courtesy of Zach McGill. Remember to check out our Marketing Master mini class at innovabiz.co/marketing master. It's completely free, my gift to you, and accessible without even giving away your email. But most importantly, in less than 30 minutes, you'll gain absolute clarity about your ideal client and how you can communicate with them to build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship. And if you'd like our help to go even deeper into marketing mastery, or our help with podcast production, then send me an email to jurgen@innovabiz.co and we'll get in touch, have a quick conversation, find out how we can best help one another. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got some more fantastic guests lined up, including Nigel Eccles, the co-founder of the Flick app, and Lindsay Dix of Celebrity Sites. Stay connected with us by subscribing to the InnovaBuzz podcast at innovabuzz.com/subscribe. innovabuzz.com/subscribe. Make sure you never miss another episode. It would also mean a lot to me if you leave us a review, because what you think matters. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your ideas, your suggestions, or questions you have, so go ahead and share them in the comments below the blog post for this episode. Until next time, I'm Jurgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.